All right, guys, welcome back to the Johnny Cassell Show. Today, we've got a very special guest with us. It's Steve Mayeda. He's an amazing men's coach. He runs retreats. He works with deep trauma issues. I'm really excited to get into this conversation with him. The inception of our relationship began during lockdown, actually, on Clubhouse. So it was one of those Clubhouse friendships that really brought us together. You've already met one of the guys, Mr. Eric Everhard, and this is another member of the band, Steve Mayeda, from the Sexual Superpowers Club. So Steve, man, thanks for coming on, dude.
Yeah, man, the Sexual Superpowers Club. That was great. I remember when Eric told me about it first, he's like, you got to meet this guy, Johnny. He's doing this and that, and he's doing da-da-da-da. And I think I want him to be on the show. And I was, cool. And as we talked about, one of the things with Eric is he's if you are referenced by Eric, you're good. So it's like, that's how I met you, man. But yeah, it was great.
He's a great guy. I mean, just to touch on Clubhouse, because I actually really want to speak into that, because I was thinking about this the other day. I was actually going through some old messages that took me back to like 3 or 4 years ago. I was like, Jesus, man, I met a lot of people on this app. I mean, we were doing I was speaking to Eric about it. We'd done about 360 rooms together talking. And I knew you were super excited about it because, this is your subject, you're really passionate about it. And you were like, what? Mm-hmm. You don't realize what's happening right now. There's so many little things we can. And it was like our first day at school again when you hit on Clubhouse, because everyone was trying to sort of land grab and establish themselves, and there was a lot of uncertainty of what sort of relationships you were going to create on there. And a beautiful thing was how we formed our relationship on there and did so much content together.
Yeah. No, there were tons of rooms, man. I really liked Clubhouse. I haven't been on the app in a long time, and do you still go on?
I don't go on. I mean, I think it had its kind of moment. I think it was a great app for lockdown. It really bridged what we needed, that social nourishment. And I think kind of everyone just kind of reverted back on the platforms. But I mean, what I wanted to ask you as well is, out of all of the rooms we did, what was one that stood out for you? What topic stood out for you that we covered and that we explored?
Man, I forget. There were a couple people who were on our room of the Sexual Superpowers room that stuck out. And God, who was the BDSM guy in New York? That dude dropped some crazy science. I mean, you were just like, what the fuck? And there were some other people that really, really stuck out. You know what is a funny thing? This is totally bizarre. We didn't figure this out till later. But Noname, she went to middle school with me. We went to the same middle school at the same time. It's crazy. What? So I hit her up about something that had to do with herbs, because she would talk a lot about sex and talk about herbs for men and what could help in these different ways. And so we started talking, and then it was like, wait, what? What? And so we actually went to the same middle school together, which was just totally crazy.
What the hell are they teaching in that school, man? Because it obviously put you
I don't know.
on similar paths.
Yeah. It's totally nuts. And there were some other people too of course, there were some other people too that really stuck out, and they would talk about alternative relationships, because alternative relationships, everybody likes to talk about, but I think most of the time people are kind of full of shit about them. They talk about when it's good, but when it goes bad, there's just not enough time that we've had all these alternative different relationships. But there were some people on there that were impressive with it, that I thought said good things.
That's true.
Yeah.
There is a lady in mind that I know who you're speaking of, actually, and she had some fascinating stories, which I would like to explore more conversation about that with all sorts of different guests. Because you're right, I feel like there's a lot of talk about the excitement of doing it, but there's not much conversation around how you mitigate the issues and how long those relationships actually last.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's the lion's share of people that do last in that relationship format.
Right.
But what I want to do anyway, because for my audience, this may be the first time that they've experienced your voice and know what you're about. And, I just like to give you the opportunity right now to sort of share a little bit about your story. I know you speak quite openly about conflicts in marriages and when it goes wrong, child custody. And I know you've also had a relationship with addiction. and solve those issues in your life as well, and the men that you work with. So yeah, fire away, man. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, no, man. So first off, men in our modern culture experience specific issues over and over again. And so we hear this talked about all the time. And within the different, men's communities, we hear this brought up all the time. But there's never really a solution. The solution is always money, sex, power, status, and these types of things. Like as if you could just make a decision or change your image, and then these things would be resolved, or learn a quick reframe. And that's not really how they work. And when you get into things like depression, addiction, sexual issues, divorce and custody, not being able to see your kids, having like this general idea of men being expendable in our culture, we seem to cite all these problems all the time. And now there's some people that have put them together, but it's still very few people that are working any solution for them that is outside of the money, sex, power, status dynamic. So, and again, like money, sex, and power, they can all be great things. They can revolutionize your life, but they're not going to solve the deeper problem that is so reoccurring in our society and our culture. And also the other thing too is our culture and society is not going to be solved by just fixing your problem. It's a deeper thing. So what created men's problems is also, it's far deeper than just changing some school books or, Google search engine. So like if you're a man and you're signed into your Google account and you say, I'm being abused by my wife, what do I do? You'll get answers that have to do with like, well, try listening better and be a better man and yada, yada, yada. And this sort of thing, right? Which could be good advice, but if you're being attacked, that's bad advice. And if you are signed into Google and a woman and it'll say like, here's the hotline for, domestic abuse and the women's shelter and all this sort of stuff. And the idea of a men's shelter is just ridiculous, right? Too, like nobody would ever want that. Even your listeners might see it's really bad. But, there's guys in my group that do get stabbed by their partners and stuff like that, or have guns pulled on them. And what do you do? What do you do? And it's kind of like the same problem that women had 50 years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago, or maybe even happening now. It's just our society cares about it more, but that's not going to be changed by Google, just redoing their systems, which they should. But so the problem's very deep, right? And so if we just solve our problem, we're going to create even more problems. This is what I call like a false solution. So like if we're a guy and we're denied access to our kids, or we're in the throes of addiction or alcoholism or whatever it is, if we're a man and we're in those certain areas, we might get a solution of going like, hey, look, if I get another job, if I make some more money, if I achieve some more status or whatever, that's good, but it won't solve the underlying problem of addiction or getting your kids back or whatever it is. Or dealing with the pain that you now have of losing your kids. So before you lost your kids, it might be helpful to get these things, but after the pain and suffering of losing your kids, there's a totally different dynamic that you have to, walk back into life with and all these sorts of things. So it's really tough. But yeah, where this all started was, from the age of 14 to 30, I was a drug addict. I got sober from 17 to 20. And then relapsed basically from 20 to 28, and then tried to get clean from 28 to 30, and 30 till now. I've been able to be clean so far.
Was that just being a product of a certain environment? Was it what led you to be exposed to that in the first place?
There's all sorts of different theories on it, and this is one thing that I also dislike about the addiction stuff is like they say the opposite of addiction is connection. Well, okay, no shit. Give an addict a hug. Okay, no shit. But this actually goes into that same thing that I was talking about of if we try and solve what would make a man happy, or anybody, man or woman, happy before they have conflict or pain, that might work. But the solution to prevent that is not going to help them after they've had the pain or conflict. So yeah, an addict may have needed a hug, but every addict I know got plenty of hugs from their friends and family. They may have needed connection, but once they're into addiction, it's a different thing back to repair themselves. And so if a father loses custody, same thing, like before he lost custody, maybe these things could have helped him out, but afterwards there's a new pain that erupts the whole universe. But basically what got me an addict, man, there's all sorts of arguments, pain, suffering, not feeling whatever, and having something that made me feel better. Those types of things. Some people say it's genetic, but addiction goes up in how more complicated our society gets. So it's a mix of perhaps genetics and society. And the other thing too is in more primitive or less stimulating cultures, people who would have those traits that would be addicts have a place in that culture, which is actually very valued. So they could be, the seekers, the risk takers, the warriors, the shamans, all that sort of different stuff that you might see in other cultures.
Right. And a lot of people, when you talk about coming out of addiction, there's like the 12-step plan. I mean, is that something that you kind of went through? I mean, there's like a religious aspect to it as well, or was there another path out of it?
No, well, so very good question. And you got to stop me because I'll talk about this a lot. So I am a 12-step person, but I also worked in one of the first ever plant medicine rehabilitation centers for addiction. So basically people would go to Mexico or Costa Rica or somewhere where you could legally do certain treatments that were specific towards addicts, and mainly for opiate addicts that were doing iboga, and they did something called ibogaine. Actually, it's a distilled version of iboga. And every single one of them relapsed, and plenty of people died, and plenty of those people died begging me for their lives to help them. And so I believe very strongly in plant medicine, and I believe very strongly in the 12 steps, but I don't think that one discounts the other, which is often the thing. And so when you get to what works about 12 steps, so first off, in 12 steps, there is no religious aspect. The people who wrote it talked about God within it, but those people also didn't know another word to use, and it made it in there. I mean, the real thing is higher power, which is a power greater than yourself. Literally anything outside of myself is a power greater than myself. So you don't need to be religious or spiritual or believe in the supernatural to be a part of the 12 steps. But these aren't the only problems that people run into with 12 steps. So also total abstinence, people have a problem with. There's also, the recognizing of clean time or sobriety that people may have a problem with. They have a problem with there's not enough success in them. But as these things are pointed out, one of the things that is totally flawed. So it's a very complicated discussion, but one of the biggest flaws in this is everybody says, well, science tells me that the neurons in the brain, when you do iboga or ibogaine, resets, and it does. Okay, it doesn't for everybody. It's not 100%. But what made everybody relapse and die, and if they didn't die, they may be living a worse life now than they started out, was that they didn't have order to go back to after their plant medicine treatment. So in saying I believe in plant medicine, I absolutely believe it. But it needs to have, well, this is also complicated because I work with different indigenous groups that do this, and it's great. But I think when it comes to the US or when it comes to Western culture, first world Western culture, it does need to be regulated. So that's a big argument within the communities as well, is should it be unregulated, like you go to the jungle and you work with a shaman? Sure, do that, but do it for a couple of years. Don't just do it once. It's not going to, you're going to be more screwed up from it.
I want to, something I wanted to ask you about, because I knew that you were working in this space with shamans and all the plant medicine and stuff. And over recent years, I've certainly encountered people that will go to the Peruvian jungles or Colombia or wherever and take these substances, right? Mm-hmm. But it seems like every time I see them, that if it's not in a Peruvian jungle, it's someone's flat in East London that's got hold of it. It seems to be there's a cycle of needing to keep on doing it. Arguably, if I'm thinking about that individual that I have in mind right now, I have seen them get better. I have certainly seen them create more awareness around their behaviors and manage themselves a lot and subsequently understand how their behavior can affect others. I've seen the difference, which is astonishing, really.
Yeah.
But there's something in me that's something sits with me in regards to the need to feel something different, and totally. They're using that as an outlet. And I think there's a lot of that perhaps going on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's so crazy. So first off, 12 steps are great. When we look at plant medicine statistics, they're horrible, man. They're horrible. So, and they lie. Like, that's the other thing too. It's the Wild West. There's no regulation. So 12 steps does have regulation around it. And let me just say, it has the longest amount of people recovering. It has the most generational recovery, meaning they've done it for many, many years, and like even their kids have gone through it and whatever. It has the longest term. So people who have like 40 or 50 years clean, you can find them today and talk to them. Plant medicine is so new, you don't have that. But so when we get to the science of it, when we get to the actual statistics, things that would matter, the 12 steps have the most concrete in every variable, in every society that they've been implanted into work. And the other thing too is it's free. So think about this. Like, what does plant medicine always talk about? Well, we think it should be community. We think it should be free. We think it should be, all this stuff. We think it should be good and all this idealistic stuff. I can go to and I do this. I can go to any country in the world, walk into a 12-step meeting for free. I can most likely get picked up by somebody, get fed by them, get a friendship from them, and all these different things. Like, that will happen. But if I want to go drink yahe or ayahuasca or do wachuma, or which is also San Pedro, or whatever, eat mambe, or all these different things, right? If I want to do that, I'm going to have to pay a lot of money. I'm going to have this crazy hierarchy. 12 steps have no hierarchy. There's none. There's no leader. There's no one central leader. This is crazy. An international thing. And if I want to do anything with plant medicine, it's going to be highly, highly capitalistic. Plant medicine rehabs charge more than traditional recovery rehabs. And then they say, well, 12 steps has a 7 to 10% success rate. That's true. That's true. That's absolutely true. And then plant medicine places will say they have a 50 to 70% success rate, but they also measure it differently. So they say, well, you can use in relapse. We don't consider that a relapse. We still consider that a success. So you could still be using heroin. So at the plant medicine rehab or the aftercare place that I worked at, where all the people died and so on, and all of them in Austin are totally fucked up. They're horrible, man. I think plant medicine is so good that they're bastardizing its name. And again, like, if you have friends who did iboga, and like people always tell me like, well, I did it and it worked. I'm happy for you. I think iboga and ibogaine should be studied and worked and used specifically for what they do. They'll help with withdrawals for some people, not for everybody, but they will not help you how to live life. They'll give you a spiritual experience that'll be very hard to come back from, but it will not help you integrate that and all that sort of stuff. And all those people are taking huge amounts of money from people. It's the most capitalistic thing, right?
Yeah. I'm seeing
so if I go to Colombia and I work with so people that I really work with, they'd be called taitas in yahe or ayahuasca. If I work with them, it's free. It's free. I can do work, with them or whatever. Like, money is not part of it. And the medicine was never in all of its lineage for hundreds of years, going through the Spanish conquest and hiding from people and people dying for it, their tribes being decimated and being left. Because, for 3 meals a day that they could go and, convert to Catholicism and whatever. The people that carried the message of yahe, ayahuasca, wachuma, awakoya, all these different things, right, were killed off and decimated. And so the people that carried it weren't carrying it as medicine to fix the broken heart of Western society. They were carrying it as a medicine that help them do many, many things. And each one is different. So like for ayahuasca, it may have been to get a vision to gain a certain treatment. And there's different forms of ayahuasca, different, generally comes from the Shipibo, but in Colombia, the Kofan, and all these different, there's many different forms of it and many different taitas or people serving it that have different intentions. What people were carrying wasn't a message so that some guy or girl in England or Europe or Australia or in the United States or wherever they're coming from could be healed from the pain of a broken, being a kid or a product of a divorce, or from not being seen, felt, and heard. These people always had that. They always had that in these smaller societies. And so the medicines were being used for different things, and every medicine's different. So if you did mushrooms, that's not the same as doing ayahuasca. Doing one person's medicine of ayahuasca is different from another person's. And so all these different things, when it comes to plant medicine, we take and transform into the tongue of first world Western culture, which is totally screwed up. It's a big thing. And everybody always tells me like, well, if I'm going to drink ayahuasca, I'm going to go to Peru and I'm going to do it with a real person. Man, at this point, I can tell you I've lived with real people, and you probably don't want to do that. If you may not feasibly be able to do that. It's very hard, and it's not, you get sick, you get diseases. Yeah. Well,
right.
So the group I live with is not a yahe group. It's a different one. So yahe is another form of ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is, everybody makes it different. It's all different, but it has the ayahuasca plant and it has the chacruna plant. And in yahe, it could be made in many different ways, but it has ayahuasca, and that it has something that is called the pinta plant or the vision plant. And I forget the specific, the genealogical, whatever thing for it, but it's two different plants, and the effect is generally the same. You could go into all sorts of different particulars about it, but the group that I live with is not a Yahe group. They don't use ayahuasca, and they're just kind of meditators. But I do know groups that are, the people that I would drink with.
Wait a minute. So to be clear, like
mm-hmm.
your living circumstances is with a tribe. Is that what you're trying to tell me right now, or you have lived?
Yeah. So I live in two places, or maybe you could say three. I live in Austin, Texas. I'll live in Bogota, Colombia. And then I'll live in the Sierra Nevadas in Colombia. And with the tribe I live with, they're called the Arhuacos. And they generally would do something that we would call meditation. And they're a very, very interesting group. If you go to Colombia, you'll see a bunch of these things that everybody calls mochilas, but they're actually called tutus. And the women weave these, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm writing and producing about the tutus themselves. But in living with a tribe, or let's say if I were to go to the Kofan tribe in Colombia, which they are Yahe drinkers, and one of the main leaders is, I wouldn't say a friend of mine, but I see him regularly and try and learn as much as I can. If you were to go to live with them and drink with them, it would be hard, meaning you're exposed to the elements. You'll get parasites. You'll get sick in ways you can't imagine. I would just say read some of Wade Davis's material, who is an anthropologist and he's an amazing author. But he's an anthropologist as well as a botanist that is from Canada, but he graduated from Harvard. And so he's kind of like US and Canadian. He's also Colombian. They gave him honorary citizenship because of a book he wrote called One River. And he talks a lot about how sick you will get. And I can relate with him, being so sick and vomiting and crapping yourself for weeks on end, but being as happy as you possibly can because of what you get from the love and wisdom from some of these people. But it's not easy.
So how long has this been going on for? And did you feel that you would weave it into the sort of work that you're doing with the guys that you're meeting?
Yeah. Yeah, man. So I've been living with them for a little over a year and a month. A year and maybe 2 months at this point. But so a little over a year, but I've been working with the different tribes for about 2.5, maybe 2 years. I'd feel better saying that. And then I've been working with the groups adjacent to that for 3. So when we started in Clubhouse, I was already living in Colombia, and I'd already been drinking Yahe. So that was 4 or 5 years ago. But then I started working with more local Lakota groups here that did Anipis, which is a sweat lodge, and all this different sort of stuff. Really, really good, really traditional. But this is a very interesting topic because there's a prophecy that was made a long time ago by South Americans called the Eagle Condor prophecy, when North America, the eagle, and the South America, the condor, come together. And everybody who drinks ayahuasca goes, "Oh man, it's the prophecy. I'm the prophecy." And about 2 years ago, I started working with groups doing that were in Colombia. And I would be at these things that are called malokas, but you sit in a circle and you talk all night, and different tribes. So Shipibo people and, there's like 12 different tribes that'll come, and they've never seen a white person before. And they're coming for it's pretty crazy.
You're like Mowgli sitting there, man.
It's what every new age person would dream of, but you have to do a lot of manual labor. There's no bathroom, there's no shower, and you eat like man, it's hard. So for many, many days, and you can't just show up. You have to be invited and all this sort of stuff. So I was at that, and then I started to meet other elders from different communities, and then the Arhuacos invited me in. So that's kind of how this all started. But yeah, for 2 years, I've been involved in that group that has the different malokas where everybody talks. And man, it is insane because you'll see people from tribes that have literally, they only come once a year for this meeting, and they'll talk, and there'll be different things talked about. One thing about the Eagle Condor prophecy is, yeah, man, I've seen them award an American chief as the eagle. So like whatever, 12 tribes, or I don't know how many, maybe only 4 of them participated in it, but they said, you are the first eagle to come to us. Like I've been there when that happens. And
what does that mean? What does that mean if someone is crowned an eagle? What is that?
No, it's not really crown that. It's that you're the person that's shaking the hand, the North and South America. It has begun. The prophecy has begun. And here's the interesting thing that like the people from Europe and the US and so on like to say as they go, man, I'm a part of the prophecy. You got to realize the merging of the eagle and the condor coming together is conflict, because there's 2 different cultures that grew that need to talk to each other to complete the system of harmony or whatever. But it's not, it's good because it's happening, but it's not pretty. That means there's, maybe decades of suffering that are going to happen, or it's the idea, or maybe one interpretation of it. But man, from the people that carried that message, not some dude with a podcast that makes it on Joe Rogan, but the people that carried that message, I have been in the room with, and it's very different than what the people who go on Joe Rogan or whatever, say what it is. So
it sounds like one hell of a life experience, and the fact that you've really immersed yourself amongst these tribes and formed such a relationship with them is phenomenal. There's something I wanted to segue into, because as I say, like you openly talk about custody of your children after a messy divorce and stuff like that. And it's an odd one, isn't it? I mean, I can only really speak from my experience here in the UK. It just seems like the courts are stacked against men. So I don't know what it seems to be elsewhere. But I mean, what was the experience, if you don't mind sharing, that you had that kind of got you so passionate into speaking into this space and helping others that are going through the same thing? Because there's not many voices it's an important voice to have. There's not many strong voices that are talking about this sort of stuff. So I'm interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a big thing for me, because in the men's advice world, there's a bunch of people that cite out the problems of divorce and custody, and none of them that have any answers for it. So if you're a man, you can win, but it's corrupt. If you're a man, you can get custody of your kids, or fair custody of your kids, or whatever you want to call it, but it's expensive. You're going to be screwed over. Okay. So you need to understand that. So, but you can. And if you can,
what do you mean?
You learn.
What do you mean screwed over by achieving that?
Yeah, there's so much financially. There could be a period of time where you don't see your kids. The courts are not going to want to listen to you how you probably think they should. There's a whole different language that you have to learn. So, for instance, if we talk about how I'm a good dad and my ex is lying about me and she's a bad mom, if we walk into how we're talking about that, it's going to piss off a judge or a magistrate or whoever's in charge, right? It's going to infuriate them. And then the other thing too is precautions for violence, abuse, any type of abuse, even sexual abuse towards women or kids. All courts already have something put into place where they will be really harsh on the man with. But if it's a woman, she'll jump through more hoops on it. So that is unfair, right? That's unfair. But it can happen. So how does it happen? So everybody in the manosphere and red pill talk about how it's unfair, but nobody talks about how it can happen because none of them have done it or something, when there's tons of fathers who've done it. It's the vast minority of fathers. It's not the majority. It's very few. But at this point, there's thousands of dads who have won custody and nobody's actually talking to them on how they did it. And how this all started for me was I didn't actually want to be a dad. I didn't really care about being a dad. And then I became a dad. And then it was like, well, I guess I didn't really know what to do. It was right when I was getting sober. So remember I said I got sober at 28 and then at 30, I got sober for good. Well, my first 2 kids were born when I was 28 and 30. And so at 30, I got clean, but was in heavy, heavy dysfunction. And with their mom, we've made a lot of peace, but we put each other through hell, like in horrible ways, right? Now, you could argue, I would definitely argue, that I did not deserve to have my kids taken away. But her and her family made multiple false claims against me, and they always got thrown out. And basically for a period of 5 years. And they were bad. They all sorts of lies, right?
Right.
And, on all sorts of really particular and detailed abuse. which I got to read the reports of.
You're talking about giving her emotional abuse, physical abuse. Like, what were they talking about?
It was either physical or sexual abuse. And anytime somebody makes a false claim about sex abuse, now guys I work with reading the different false claims against them, they're always so detailed. Like, I wish forensic psychologists, maybe they are at this level right now, they could understand how to read these things, because when you read the false ones, you can get it right away. And they're so specific, they're so disturbing, like how a mother, a grandmother, a grandfather would make up a lie to CPS, medical, as well as law enforcement about what this parent did to their child. And then, you know, they get put in jail or have their kids taken away. And then after 2 years, they, you know, work with me on this case that's horrible that they spend $90,000 on or whatever. Or sometimes it's like $600,000 the guys will spend on this, or women that go through it. It's horrible for either one. And that lie, like, it comes back to that lie that they told law enforcement or nurses or doctors. It is always so warped what is being said. And it's like, and there's no punishment for it. It's a separate case. Like, so anyway, this parlays into the next thing. So in 2012, I got charged with physical abuse, injury to a child, and all those cases didn't matter. You would think it would matter, right? But it doesn't matter. Right. So this is where we have to start learning the language of the courts. Even though a family had traditionally, not just with me, but with other people, made up abuse claims, you know, over and over again, because there was enough evidence in this case in 2012, they could arrest me and not worry about that. The judge didn't, because a judge determines what evidence is going to go into a court case. So the judge didn't care because there was enough in this 2012 case. Now, I was so caught up in not arguing that evidence and probably hiring the wrong attorney. And there were all sorts of things in that court case that it went on for a year. It bled me. And after like a year and a month or something like that, the judge is like, well, we have to go to trial. You can either take this plea or go to trial. And I took the plea. Now, everybody says that this is wrong. And so when you take a plea, I didn't know this. I walk up to the judge. I said, okay, I'll take the plea. In that plea, they make you admit guilt. So in essence, that's perjury, right? So you're forced into this situation where you're like, what? I didn't realize until I was in front of the judge. But I've now watched guys go through this over and over again. And people, especially in the men's community, will say, you're weak because you didn't fight for whatever. You couldn't. You just can't. And I'll even say, like, man, maybe I could have fought. I've now taken guys much further than I did, and they continue fighting. And sometimes they're forced into not being able to see their kids. You got to stop fighting. It's too expensive. I'd already spent $50,000 at that point. Couldn't do any more. The trial would be another $16,000 or $20,000 or whatever. Just, it couldn't happen. It could not happen. And trials, people often argue that you can do it yourself. And a trial that's that complicated, I would not advise it. If it's general custody, I would always recommend having a lawyer. But you have more of a chance going in pro se representing yourself in that situation because it's less complicated. It can get so crazy when your civil liberties are on the line. Because the argument
it just sounds like you're completely financially crippled and you've got no choice to kind of end it before the end. So it's stacked against.
So the key mistakes that I made there was I didn't understand how the law worked, how to organize evidence and argue evidence, and how the courts cared about that. Because that is the first thing. In fact, man, there were so many things in that had opportunities to kill it. But if you have false claims and they enter into a CPS investigation, which is different than a criminal one, but mine entered into criminal and CPS. But either one of those things, you have to stop it in the beginning. So you have to understand how to stop it. How to stop it isn't arguing or just saying what you think or talking what your friends think. It's thinking, what would a judge say to this? How is a judge going to look at this evidence? How is it argued in court? And now I'm going to go watch court cases to see how it's argued and find similar cases like mine, hopefully with the same judge as mine, and argue it in the ways that work. And for that, more than likely, you need a lawyer, which then you need to understand, how do you find an attorney for this? So how do you find a family law attorney if you're just divorce and custody or just custody? How do you find a criminal attorney if there's criminal charges that you're being accused of? And how do you find an attorney that's experienced in your specific type of case? Now, all attorneys want money, so they're going to sell you. So you need to learn how to find an attorney that can talk to you and your case and win your case and argue your case. That's your job to do. And there's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of red flags with attorneys, but they are, look, it's there's so many, right?
Well, how did you? I mean, you talk about taking the plea. So subsequently, didn't that then lead to you losing custody of your child, right?
Yeah. Well, I'd already lost custody.
Right.
I hadn't seen my kids in over a year at that point. Yeah.
So then how did you bounce back and turn it around? Like what happened? Did you just reach amicable terms with your ex outside of court and then was able to bridge back the relationship? Look, or what happened?
Man, I'll tell you exactly how. And when guys ask me this, because guys are going through false claims and they have their kids taken away by their mom or whatever.
Because I think it's an important thing. I always say, like the measure of a good relationship is how well you manage conflict. And we're talking about this is insane. What's going on? Outside of the relationship, like what's going. I mean,
yeah.
I want to know how you did it. A scorned woman is something to stay away from. If you got a child involved, there's no staying away from it.
Hey man, let me tell you, it ain't easy. So this is going to sound tough and rough, but in dealing with somebody, and the only person I know is me who deals with this, and there could be more, but in dealing with a guy who has been falsely accused, going through a high conflict custody case, I'm going to tell you that it's okay to hate your ex. It's okay. And she may hate you, she may not. Don't worry about the high road. And you can't, because you're going to have to fight. And anybody who's willing to attack you in that way, they're probably going to attack you again in that way. So for some period of time. So you're going to have to go to war. And if you go to war with the mind of a soldier, you're just willing to blow yourself up. So you have to go to war with the mind of a general who sees the overall picture, meaning that peace will have to come later, meaning that we'll have to rebuild something, in some way. Or else it'll just build chaos. Like if we just went to war with why people were pissed off and we didn't have an overall, like how do we rebuild an economy and all that sort of stuff afterwards, it would be a flawed war. War is bad. I'm not trying to say it's good. But if you're in this, you're in a war. So it's okay to hate your ex. It's okay to be that angry. Now you have to know that anger, if you hold on to it, it's going to kill you. All right. But right now you're in a war and you have to be able to step forward and do things that you're not used to and have less compassion. So what happened to my ex, I mean, she put me in jail. It was horrible. I hated her. What a horrible person.
To step into a place to be forgiven after that is, that's a story I want to hear.
Well, so check this out. Here's what's even worse. So at this time in 2012, I started a new relationship. So I couldn't see my kids and I met somebody and it was great. So we ended up getting together. We got married. We had kids. It was a beautiful relationship. It was so good in so many ways. And we started to have problems, and I didn't really, understand it or get it. And so in 2019, so fast forward 2012 to 2019, my old kids get reintegrated. The protective order went away. So my older kids, and then I had two younger kids with this new relationship. So we started to have problems in 2019. And I was like, where are these I didn't really get it. I didn't really understand. And I don't want to say like I was naive or stupid. Of course, everybody has problems, but I didn't realize they were this big. So I did everything, that I saw my clients do, and then I know doesn't work. But what do? You want to save your relationship, right? So I did everything I could to save it. And then she did what everybody that I'd seen with my clients do. She blew it up. So she sabotaged it all. And what she told me in early 2019 or maybe mid 2019, she said, I had this dream that we broke up and you tried to fight me for custody and I used your old case against you. I was like, what? What are you talking about? But at that point, I started to be more cautious. And at that point, I was already making divorce and custody products and talking to different lawyers about different things. And so I started to talk to them. So I took some preventative measures there. So when she blew up the relationship, she sabotaged it, and all that sort of stuff. She then tried to implement that plan. Well, at this point, I already had the evidence enough to disprove whatever false claims she would make. So she tried, this is crazy. She tried to use my previous case of false abuse accusations, which she went to court with me when I took my plea. And she had made multiple court appearances with me when you have to check into the judge. She tried to use that to say
Steve,
that she was really...
You off-picked them, man.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So people will say that, but which makes me feel bad, right? I was talking to Owen Cook, RSD Owen, about it. And he goes, he's so nuts. And in the best way, I love Owen. But he's like, well, you take these people with borderline or narcissistic personality disorder, and their traits, which are the red flags, are the traits you're supposed to like, you're taught to like in our culture. And I was like, oh, that makes me feel a little bit better. But anyway, so and we all have problems and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But now in dealing with men, this is so common. Like you could say I pick them, but so did 100 guys every week. That
I have too. It just hasn't gone that far down the line like it has with yours, where a child's involved and stuff.
Yeah. Well, when you have kids, it ups the ante, man. So anyway, we kill it, man. I had a lot of friends who were lawyers. We got started once I realized the relationship was done, which destroyed me on a personal level in so many different ways. Man, we just went for it. We went for it in terms of designing our case. We did depositions. She lied a bunch in the deposition. She lied over 100 times under oath and just basically embarrassed herself in all these ways. But what was interesting is she would not sign. So this is an interesting thing when guys go into the courts. Like, you want to have as much leverage. So we had as much leverage on the front end of the case. There's no way she could step forward in this case without losing her job, losing her real estate license, she would lose custody, hands down. She could even face other charges that were criminal charges, or they could be civil lawsuits that could come from it. There would be no way that would not happen. That would have to happen if we stepped forward with a hearing. So she refused to sign. So we go, okay, finally, after 9 months, we said, okay, let's go to court. We go to court. Her lawyer fires her, won't represent her. She goes in alone. And the judge actually said, hey, look, I just had to swear in all these witnesses, and I don't understand why you won't sign. I know Steve's lawyer. This isn't going to be good. So I would just encourage you to sign. And so she brought up some things, and the judge says, look, that's not possible. Your argument can't happen in court. This is like what happens to many guys in court. They go into court with an argument that can't happen. So the judge gave her mercy. But the witnesses that she signed in, and this is where the forgiveness happens or begins or whatever you want to call it. The mother of the kids from my first kids came to witness and without incriminating herself, to give her testimony, which was the previous charges, which didn't really matter at this point. That we had already proved that this was not an issue in our case. But she said the previous charges were overreactions from the court. Steve is a great dad. He can see the kids by himself. And I've seen him be with all of his kids and be a great dad. It was a mistake by all the parties involved. And I'm the main witness, or one of the main testifiers in that first case. And, here's my testimony now. It was wrong. So she couldn't say that she lied or whatever, because I could start something else. And so at that point it was easy. We were already talking, just for general things, but we could talk a lot more after that. And that was good. Now, at the same time, she's still somebody, you can only trust so much, but I talk to her almost every day. We organize stuff with the kids and all that sort of stuff. It's like, that doesn't take back the harm that it caused the kids, myself, the money. It doesn't reverse a lot of things, but that makes things a lot easier. So that's how that happened.
Well, it's such a crazy story, and and what a turnaround as well. But I mean, it's an important one to tell, because you don't have to go too far to hear the stories and the fear from men moving into marriage. I mean, I read some statistic the other day that family unions and marriages are down. And it's exactly because of this. The court is stacked against men. And so off the back of that, the obvious question to us, and I think you kind of answered it through, what you mentioned through the conversation you had with Owen. And I think he's right. We are drawn towards that something unusual, that uniqueness about someone. And you often it is assigned to a personality disorder. I've been there myself. I've been at a situation where it would have been more safer to jump. I mean, she had a penthouse apartment. It would have been more safe for me to jump out the window to try and make it out the front door.
Yeah,
that is real. Yeah. So completely relate to it. But I mean, if I was to ask myself, what are the preventative things that I could have put in place that doesn't allow someone in to my life in that way, I think we spot the red flags at the beginning. We just choose to walk past them because it's a bit exciting and dangerous. You know, I think who we attract is where we are at the time. If I always say this to the guys, it's like they talk about their crazy ex-girlfriend. I'm like, no, dude, you were crazy at that point, you know?
Totally.
So,
no.
Yeah.
So this gets tricky in the overall thing, right? If you're choosing poor women to have relationships with, it's your fault. And so for me personally, at the point when we broke up, like I really thought I was good. And this is not to say I was like the perfect partner or whatever, or anything like that. But I really thought I had resolved a lot of those issues in my life. And I swore to anything that was listening, right, that I would never put myself through this again, and I would fix whatever I had to in relationships. And in between then, you know, I'd date around, but wouldn't have a serious relationship with anybody if I had not resolved those things. And the real thing is you never really know when that is fully done. But that was a big thing to me. Now, the difference between me and most guys, because like I work with guys now, and in my groups, we have like all this divorce and custody stuff, we have dating stuff, but we also have how do we deal with dysfunctional relationships, and we have calls with therapists. So within my groups, there's like all this stuff. And guys that enter into a relationship with an abusive woman, which is super common now, right? Like it doesn't just mean you're screwed up. It does mean you're screwed up, but it's so common. It's kind of like the starting place. Your starting place is screwing up. Just like your starting place in the courts as a guy is, it's going to be unfair. Get over it. Let's learn how to win. So your starting place is that you're going to make bad decisions in relationships that you think are good. And the red flags you can't always see. Now, for me, I'll say I should have seen them because I had experience with them before. I had all this therapy before. I knew about them. I screwed up, you know, when I started my relationship in 2012 to 2019. And so guys who are going through abuse, like narcissistic abuse or something like this, somebody with a personality disorder, they're not going to want to hear right away that they're screwed up for choosing the wrong person. All right. They're going to need to go through a process of all that pain. But the trick is you got to then lead them to, okay, now are you ready to face the responsibility of, you know, you did like this. You know, there were things that you liked and couldn't see. And how can you change them? Because if you have kids again, like I did with somebody who's going to cause those problems, it doesn't just cause pain for you. It causes pain for your kids. And you need to fix all those things. So it's a really crazy thing. Yeah. It's tough.
That's an interesting talking point I want to get into is, you know, how do you then repair the relationship with your child? Because, you know, when they're with the mother, they've heard all sorts of things about dad that aren't even true, you know, so they have this warped idea of who he is, this distrust and this, you know, that there's that indifference there. So you know, what are the steps that one can take to repair their relationship with their child in that given situation?
Man, Johnny, this is a big question. So for a dad who's gone through parental alienation, so generally this is what it's called, is parental alienation, when one party sabotages the relationship with the child of the other party. So one parent alienates the other parent through the child, right? So, and it's a whole thing. And the courts don't really care about it in the way that psychology is starting to cite it. So psychology has studied it for some time, and the courts haven't. The way courts change is through legislature or through court rulings. And there's not enough court rulings or changes in the laws or the statutes that acknowledge parental alienation enough. But in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully sooner, it starts to happen because it's a huge thing. And the results that come from one parent parentally alienating another with the child are not equivalent to physically or sexually abusing, like really physically or sexually abusing a kid for a long period of time, but they're pretty close and there's tons of overlap, and these things are studied. So if you alienate a parent, if I say to my kids, your mom is bad and she's evil and this is what you should think of her, and I'm going to keep you from her and make you not want to see her, which is usually what happens, this done will basically up the depression levels, the suicidal thinking, suicidal attempts, alcoholism, drug addiction, personality disorders, general depression, all these things will just go way up. I mean, they will multiply, massively. So if a parent kills themselves I forget what the stat is, but their child is like 8 times more likely to kill themselves than a normal person or something like this. And it is that it goes that much higher for things like depression, personality disorders, suicidal thinking, suicidal attempts, and so on when parental alienation happens. So we know it is bad, but the courts haven't yet ruled upon it enough, and there aren't laws citing it, so judges don't care about it, or they can't rule upon it. And we have to understand this for how it works. So we get that that's screwed up, but let's figure out how it works. How do we fix it? Win cases, change laws. How do we change laws? Through legislature, not from bitching online. So you get somebody to go and campaign, and it's a whole difficult process, right?
Lobby for it.
So when we have the reunion with our kids, conceptually and actually literally, this is what we do. We have to, if we get our kids taken away from us as moms or dads, we have to build our lives therapeutically, mentally, I think financially, get stable. That pain that you felt, your kids don't care about. They care about their pain, and you need to work on their pain. All right, so get stable enough with your own stuff. You have to realize that when you see your kids again, they're going to think this whole weird thing of you. That, like, I trained jujitsu and taught jujitsu for many years. And my kids, the 2 kids that I have that do train jujitsu, my ex took them to a rival gym, which everybody at that rival gym says, well, for your kids, why don't you join them? I'm like, I can't. I'm belted under one gym. It's a total rule of manipulation. It's such like, why? What, like, I can't. I need to maintain good relationships. I'll train with them, as much as I can, but like it sucks. So all these things were taken away from me. So I have to have a totally different relationship with my kids. If I like cameras, videography, coaching people, my kids aren't going to like those things unless they naturally are drawn to them. They're going to like other things. So I have to learn to like those other things and do them with them. But that is one of the biggest blows, like the biggest blows. I have 4 boys that there's fundamental things that are different from them and me because their formative years I was robbed from. And actually with my ex, who I totally dominated in court, she was still able to keep the kids away from me for 9 months because of COVID. COVID happened and she used that. Wow. That's why we went to court. And it's totally screwed up. Like, what, when you think about that damage of what it does, oh, you can't see dad for whatever, and who knows what she said. But like, when you think about that, the unwillingness of a parent. So when dads in my group have their kids taken away by a woman and they can win their kids back, the general idea from everybody, because we see so many dads go through this, is absolutely let the mom have a relationship with the kids. Absolutely, because they can see in real time what happens to a parent and what happens to the kids when you take a dad away from the kids. So even though they're having that happen to them, we encourage them always to give them, to let parents be parents, right? So the relationship building with the kids is crazy. And then you have to realize a kid acting good at 10 years old or 5 years old, that doesn't mean they're good for the rest of their life. That problem that happened when they were 5 or 10 or whatever, is going to manifest into something later when they're in their 20s. And then as we see personality disorders, addictions, all sorts of things go up as society gets more complicated. In the 90s, PTSD and trauma was not the same. There's no shortage of trauma and tragedy in human history anywhere. But the way it affects people has been changing and different and getting more dramatic and rising. And so I would assume that our society is going to get more complicated and have greater problems from smaller forms of pain or pain that we didn't think was pain that happens later on in the future generations. So we're monumentally screwing up our kids if we play tug of war with them, with parents. But at the same time, what did I say in the beginning? If you're having your kids taken away, you're in a custody battle, you can hate your ex. You can. You might need to. I'm not here to talk you out of that. I'm here to talk you out to get to a point of stability, because true peace comes from stability. Building peace, building love, building any virtue or ideal, which are sacred things of what man makes. Nature does not make these things. If you build them on a broken foundation of yourself or your resentment or whatever, all those virtues will screw up. So when you hear this cheap Instagram advice of like, well, you get over it. If you're a man, just open your heart. Toxic masculinity has done that, and it's not dealing with the overall problem, and it's not fixing it all. We're basically building a broken foundation, which will collapse any virtue we put on top of it, and creating a new problem, which is going to be distrust over, the norm, where we have a bunch of angry and rebellious terroristic men that just say the court system screwed up, so I'm going to give up and be an alcoholic, which doesn't need to happen.
No, I think
those are my 2 cents, Johnny.
No, like you've had an incredible story, and I commend you for being open and sharing it with us today. I think the guy's going to get a lot out of this, and it's good to know that there's someone in their corner if they should ever be in a situation like this. And I really think it's cool that you because you can only really teach the depths you've gone yourself. I always say that, and it's great that you've took this pain into something that you're able to help your fellow brothers with. We always do something, on these podcasts, and we do a little giveaway at the end. Right, I know I've sprung this upon you now. I didn't forewarn you for this. So, and it just usually to get some, to encourage people to engage and comment under the video.
Sure.
So, is there anything that you feel that you could give away to the listeners and the viewers for the first handful of comments underneath?
For the first handful of comments, man. So give away something small. I was thinking I'm going to give away a big thing. But how about this? For the first 3 comments that we give away, it depends on what it is. Like if they type in divorce and custody or custody, I'll give them a product on divorce and custody. It's usually $97 or something like that. Okay, and it's great. Okay. So if you have a thing about custody, that's there. And for the first 3 comments. So first 3 comments on custody. It's getting complicated. I'm sorry. I'll give that away. And then if somebody has another thing on dating or anything like that for the first 3 comments, and if you type in dating or something like that, I'll give away a product for that. And if you do have interest in anything because we talked about addiction or plant medicine and so on, for the first comments that talk about that, the first 3 comments that type in addiction or plant medicine, and give them a PDF that I wrote that sort of guides it through. It's a draft form, but you might have some insight on it. So that's there. So I want to see 9 comments on this video like that. Boom.
We'll get that.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, and your website, of course.
Yeah. So basically, I tell people to find me on social media, but you can go to austinmensdevelopment.com. We're building out stevemayeda.com right now. But if you go on YouTube, Steve Mayeda, just Google it there or type it in there and something will come up. Hopefully good. TikTok at Steve Mayeda, Instagram at Steve Mayeda as well.
Beautiful. All right. I mean, we could speak for hours and hours and hours, man. I love your passion on such an array of of different topics, unique topics though. I've loved it. All right, man. Thank you very much, dude. And we'll catch up soon for sure.
Dude, you got it, man. Thank you so much for having me on. Talk soon.
God bless, brother.